Prayer is so dynamic and so powerful that it puts God into action. And I think that we've sold ourselves short on prayer.
How consciously aware are we of the messages that we're receiving? And so therefore, what do we...
These 8 strategies of Rabshakeh can be very powerful. They can be very...
Hey everybody, before we jump into today's episode, we'd like to recognize all those who make this podcast possible. The Lead Today show is supported by all the generous donors of the Lead Today community. Thank you so much for investing in shaping leaders through this podcast. And be sure to like and subscribe on whatever platform you are watching or listening today. All right, let's jump into the podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Today Count show. I got to give you a little background before we get started today. But first of all, let me talk to those of you who've never listened to the Today Count show. And then I want to talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. So the Today Count show, we called it that is because we do believe that today does count, because we believe that everything that we learn, do, think today has repercussions for tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that. You know, today is the day to be seized. So many of us are so busy that if I were to ask you what is the date today, we're probably in April, but you'd probably stutter to know whether we're on the 5th, the 6th, the 7th, or the 8th. But we're in there. So today counts also in the sense that we need to slow down a little bit, invest some time into thinking, invest some time into praying, into learning, into discussing. So that's what our show is about. It covers broad topics of life and leadership. So let me tell you about today and why you want to listen. Regardless of where you are in your faith journey, whether you are the CEO or whether you are starting your own ice cream truck business, or you're in school, or wherever you find yourself in life, I was asked to give a message not long ago based upon a song in the Bible. Christians call them Psalms, but it's essentially a song or a poem. As I did some study on this particular song, I was fascinated that most theory and scholarship says it was based on looking back at some historic events in the life of the nation of Israel, to be more exact, Judah. And I learned a lot about a young king named Hezekiah. I learned a lot about the Assyrians and the Assyrian conquest, so to speak. And I was fascinated by it. As usual, I did 10 times more study than probably what I needed to do to present a message. So you know how algorithms work, right? So I was probably on Google. I was probably researching not just in my own library, but online. And so one day I see this gentleman by the name of Timothy. Is it Rowe or Rowe?
Rowe.
Rowe. Because I have a friend who would pronounce it Rowe, and it's spelled the same way. So I have with me today Timothy Rowe and Rowe. And what was interesting is I noticed the title of a book that came up, which is a key word and I'm not going to ruin it, but is a key word in my study. Now, let me get back to why you should listen. When you see a boy or a girl play sports, and you could just tell there happens to be that at least one person on that court, on that field, that seems to just have a heart for the game. You might say, wow, that boy, that girl's got some heart. You could also replace that word with a synonym and say spirit. And there's just a spirit about that little person that just seems competitive, just has all kinds of love for this game. There is a spirit that we all have, and that is in the world today. It's a fascinating topic. So Timothy, welcome to our show today. I'm going to probably call you Tim throughout our conversation, but introduce yourself and tell us the name of this book that I'm referring to and why you wrote it.
My name is Timothy Rowe, as you said, and the book is called The Spirit of Rabshakeh is Alive and Well in America. And
let me interject. So that's a new word for most of you, Rabshakeh. That's a new word, and you want to listen more. Keep going, Tim.
All right, I appreciate it. Rabshakeh was actually a mouthpiece for the king of Syria. And what I talk about in the book is, and again, King Hezekiah is an amazing king. He's the king of a little country called Judah in the Bible. But God talks about Rabshakeh in 3 different sections of scripture in 2 Chronicles, 2 Kings, and Isaiah. That's what kind of drew my attention to it. I'm thinking this must be pretty important if there's 3 chapters of the Bible or more that's dedicated to it. So I began to study it, and I began to see parallels with what's going on in America today with what Rabshakeh did to try to get Hezekiah to surrender his kingdom. And that's why I wrote it. It took me a while to write it. It was about a 7-year project to write it. But I was real thankful that God really inspired me in writing it. And I began to see some amazing parallels between what's going on in America today and what Hezekiah faced.
Yeah, this is great. So, fortunately, this is still fresh paint for me. So hopefully I'll be able to be a good partner for you, Tim, and kind of walking through that. Just with what you already said, all kinds of things are firing off in my brain, right? One is Hezekiah's father. To contrast between he and his father fell in line with a lot of the Assyrian demands, correct?
Yes.
And as well as falling in line with not just their culture, which in and of itself may have been good or bad, but their culture of idolatry, for certain. So one of the things that hit me is right away is that Hezekiah made a choice not to follow in the way of his father. Now, many of us have fathers that would be good to follow in the same way, but many of us cannot say that, and it takes some courage and faith to go in a different direction. And so it wasn't that he was just an amazing good king, but he really had to step out against a lot of internal resistance, I would imagine, as well as probably within his own nation, and and of course the obvious with the Assyrian army. So and I think he was 25, was he not, when he became king?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was young. And I think too, Assyria was a pretty brutal empire too. They like to use psychological warfare. They like to intimidate people. Maybe they were terrorists. I think they probably were in some of the things they tried to do because they ruled by fear. Mm-hmm. And I think I talk in my book that there were fortified cities of Judah, like Lachish, that was 25 miles from Jerusalem, that was just completely wiped out by Assyria. Syria also had wiped out the kingdom to the north, Israel. And now they're standing at the wall of Jerusalem, wanting this little kingdom of Judah to succumb. So yeah, this is definitely something that he didn't walk in his father's footsteps. He had to basically trust God over the entire culture that was coming down on him.
In the research for your book, did you come across anything that talked about what the Egyptian chronicles wrote? I think, and there was, and of course the Assyrian chronicles, because we're not getting to the punchline yet, but Assyria was not successful in penetrating Jerusalem. And in my studies, I think I recall that other nations' history said the same thing. They disagreed as to why or how it happened, but I think in other writings, historical writings, it too validates the fact that Jerusalem was not um, taken over by Assyria.
Yeah, it was not. And I think I talk in my book why it was not. But I know that people today want to form alliances, and I think it was popular back then. And Rabashakeh talks about Egypt particularly, that it's a broken reed, that really you're not going to get anything from Egypt that's going to be successful against this mighty empire.
Right, right. Yeah, that was part of his prose, shouting out to the walls of Jerusalem, going back over the track record of Sennacherib, right? King Sennacherib
Right.
defeated this city, that city, this city, and so why in the world does Jerusalem think they're going to be able to stand? I mean, for those who are followers of Christ, those who are uh, God-fearers, those who believe in God, there does seem to be maybe more than ever a voice that is challenging us, that is intimidating us, and a lot of us are using terms like, or even common sense would say that this spirit, this message that we're getting from many cultures today, just doesn't make any sense. Is that part of what your book is referencing? What would you say the main message is of this book? And again, what is the title?
It's the spirit of Rabashakeh is alive and well in America.
I love that
Uh,
title.
and I think spirit, you hit it right on the nose. I mean, we're talking about, and in fact, the Bible uses the word cosmos, which is kind of an atmosphere that's a range that we breathe in. And ultimately, we've got to decide what voice we're going to listen to. Are we going to listen to the voice that tells us that Christianity is outdated, that God is outdated, that we can do it ourselves? Or are we going to listen to the voice of the Lord? And that's really the basis of the book: is who do you trust? And do we need God in these times? And that's really the essence of the book.
I wonder how many of us are even conscious of the fact that we do have we are listening. Are we conscious of the fact that if we're listening, if we've got some music in the background, if we got some narrative in the background, that what kind of filtering process do we have? How consciously aware are we of the messages that we're receiving? And so therefore, what do we do about them? Do we just put up a wall and try to, have it ricochet off the wall? Are we developing our intellect? Are we developing our answers? Are we considering them prayerfully? I mean, I wonder how many of us are just too busy to even think about all the messages that are coming to us at rapid pace. And what are we doing? What are we doing? How often do we even repeat them in some small way without really putting them on trial and testing them for what they are?
Yeah, exactly. And I think I wrote a second book about the heart, and I talked about the importance of the eyes and the ears. I mean, we are bombarded with all kinds of things today, and it comes through usually it comes through the medium of the eyes, or it comes through the medium of the ears. And God is always speaking. I just think a lot of times, and we see verses in the Bible where it says, I don't want to hear you. I don't want to have anything to do with you. I'd rather hear the voice of the world. But there is a voice speaking, both the world and the cosmos that we breathe in. And there's also God is continually speaking to us. And the question is, what voice are we following? What voice are we going to form the basis of our life? And what voice is going to be important in the decisions that we make?
Our listeners are probably going to get tired of this story because I'm going to keep telling it because it has had an impact on me over the last couple of weeks. And I think it hopefully will continue to penetrate my thinking and my heart. I've already done a little bit of writing about it. I'm going to do some more writing about it. But the story kind of goes like this. It was a Monday. I think it was about 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks at the most. Or I'm sorry, 3 weeks at the most. And my Monday calendar had about 2 hours of white space in it, which is for me, a type A person that's go, 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 go is really unusual. So it kind of freaked me out. I thought maybe I had accidentally canceled some appointments, or I also am known for blocking time for different projects. But it was a white space. And after I found out that it just appeared to be an oversight, then I asked myself, my goodness, what am I going to do with these 2 hours? Had already had a quiet time, already had some exercise, was pretty much organized for the week, knew what I was going to take on. So anyway, make long story short, I decided to take those 2 hours and do some more thinking, some more sitting, some more reading, some more praying. And so I came down to the studio and I sat on the front porch right out of the studio here, and I grabbed two books. One is entitled Greatness, and the other one is my Bible. After spending about an hour and a half of reading and thinking, I had three thoughts that came to mind. One thought was, you're thinking too small. And the second thought that came right on the heels of that was that you are praying too small. And then the third one said, you are too busy. Now, Tim, I don't know how you are, but even my good thoughts sometimes aren't really great thoughts. And I I have two kinds of gym thoughts, bad ones and good ones. But even my good ones, when I compare them to what I would call God thoughts, there's still a huge chasm between those two. And as I get older, I'm trying to pay more attention to God thoughts and trying to invest in those, even more than what I think might be a good gym thought. I didn't know for sure. I didn't think they were bad thoughts, but I didn't know if they were just gym thoughts or God thoughts. And so, I kind of said to God or to myself, maybe both. I have a board of directors, me, myself, and I, and sometimes God gets thrown out of that board. So I try to bring him back into that. And so I said, all right, if I get up in the morning and those three thoughts are still with me, I'm going to choose to believe that those are God thoughts, and then I'm going to see if I can unpack them. And sure enough, in the morning, they were more like God shouts. And so as I began to think about it, and I think this goes to the point of your book, as I began to think about it, I started saying, well, why did I get this thought that I'm having, you know, small thoughts, not big thoughts? And the more I began to think about it, I've been taking some risk lately, some physical risks, some business risks, some ministry risks, and slowly but surely, I've noticed that my mind has been captured on making ends meet instead of more visionary, courageous, kind of thinking. And then, of course, that flooded into what would be obvious. If you're thinking scarcity, if you're thinking small, you're going to start praying small. And I noticed that as I started examining my most recent prayers, my prayers used to be, God, I pray that you make my grandchildren warriors, that hell would become afraid of my grandchildren, that you would bring wonderful spouses into their lives, and then praying similar prayers for my kids and for my wife and for myself. And so though they were big prayers, but lately, my prayers have been, God, please protect them from harm. Please protect them, protect them, protect them. They were prayers of protection, which by themselves aren't bad. But if you're praying for them to be warriors that makes hell afraid, I think protection is kind of already included, you know, in that. And I just saw this slow decline of my thinking and prayer. And then I get to this other one that didn't seem to correlate with the first two until I started believing, wait a second, if this is a God thought, so when the thought came, you're too busy, and then it made all sense in the world to me. When you are too busy and you're not doing enough thinking, you're not doing enough praying, well, then of course your thinking and your prayers are going to be small. And
Right.
it kind of reminds me when I would teach boys and girls how to dribble the soccer ball or the basketball. uh, they would be so focused on their feet or their dribbling that they weren't looking up to see who's open or what obstacle might be coming. And it's so important to keep our head up. And so, as I knew this appointment was coming, I was also fascinated with the similarity of what can happen to us as believers. There is a spirit of less than. There's a spirit of fear. There's a spirit of intimidation. There's a spirit of bullying. Instead of a spirit of hope and redemption and faith and courage, those kinds of things.
No, and I think you hit it right on the head. And part of my book, I really try to talk about how big God is, and we should just enjoy him, that God says he surrounds us, that he's got our back, that he goes in front of us, that he's so much bigger than we could even comprehend. And then I have a whole chapter on prayer too, that prayer is so dynamic and so powerful that it puts God into action. And I think that we've sold ourselves short on prayer. Prayer is something that, people say, oh, I'll pray for you, but they really don't understand, I think, in what the Bible talks about, the importance of prayer. I mean, it's part of the armor of God. It's something that can shake the very gates of hell when it's used correctly. So I think that we think God too small and we pray too small. And I think we get so busy sometimes that we forget about God. I mean, I'm an attorney. It's easy to get busy and to work, but I try to set aside a time every day that I can just quiet myself and get with God. And usually the best time's in the morning, but quiet myself and not try to get so busy that I forget about God. Because one of the great things we see in Scripture is God continually says, remember me, remember me. There's a lot of memorials that God has through Scripture that God doesn't want us to forget him because he's awesome. And I think the more that we focus on God and his characteristics, the more we'll see just how great he is.
If I had a wish for my colleagues, for those that I serve, whether they're leaders of nonprofits or ministries or Fortune 500 companies or CEOs of very successful companies, whatever, is that they would come to realize the beauty of stopping to do a certain thing. What I mean by stopping, halting, not doing it anymore, compartmentalizing their faith with their work, or separating them, and instead be able to take the challenges and problems at work and see God as a partner, see God as somebody who's big enough to be small enough to care, about us, and to provide wisdom, to provide discernment, to provide some of those character elements that we had mentioned before. Out of curiosity, Tim, is Timothy a family name? Did it come from, do you know why you were named Timothy?
I don't know. I know I have the same middle name as my father. But I don't know why it was named Timothy, but it's interesting in the Greek as it's one who honors God, is the essence of Tamar and Theos, those two words. But no, and maybe I should have asked, but I never did. But I am thankful for the name. I always say God loved the name so much he put 2 books of the Bible in there. So, but it is it's an interesting name, and I am thankful I have it.
When I start talking to men and women in the marketplace, and if they become interested in reading Scripture, they want to know where to start, depending upon where their faith is at. There's a lot of typical answers that we give. To really understand the gospel, we tell people to read the Gospel of John. And many times we say, well, just start from the beginning. And it's a little bit misleading because the Bible isn't all written in chronological order, but, Genesis is a great place to start. But when I'm speaking with somebody who does have some faith, that other general answer is, well, start in the book of Proverbs because it has immediate application for wisdom and leadership and business. But I like to also mention First and Second Timothy. That's why I asked you, because the leadership concepts that
Okay.
Paul is, giving to his protege Timothy is just super valuable. I remember when I first went into ministry, somebody had mentioned that to me, and I just tore First and Second Timothy apart. I still have that Bible in my library somewhere. It's not really useful anymore because pages don't stay, where they're supposed to stay, and those pages were so highlighted, penciled. You can see that the oil from my fingers even being all over the pages. But I was just curious.
Hey everyone, we're going to take a brief break from the podcast to let you know our very own Jim Piper has released a brand new book called Story, The Art of Learning from Your Past. Everyone has a past, but not everyone learns from it. Jim unpacks lessons in this book that help leaders and learners understand the potential our past has to impact our present and our future. Be sure to grab your copy of Story where books are sold. All right? Let's get back to the podcast.
So let me say this and then ask you another question. Obviously, again, however I stumbled upon your book, I went to Amazon, and you have a good section excerpt there in Amazon of this book, and so that's what I meant by I already did some reading in it and was drawn to your writing. Being that I am somewhat educated in contract law. Thank goodness you don't write like that.
Yeah, it'd be hard to understand.
I enjoyed reading it. I have not ordered the book yet, but it's on my to-do list. I am going to order the book because I like your style of writing. It is thorough. It is interesting, and I think if somebody really does want to take a deeper dive without having to become a scholar, I think this is written at the right level, and it covers very important topics. What are some of the things that you could say about the book? What did it do for you? Right, I noticed that in the two books that I have written, I might have been the
Beneficiary.
person that benefited the most.
Yeah, I
Nobody
think
else
that's
did.
true.
Yeah. So tell me, what did it do for you in your life as you wrote it?
I think it really strengthens your faith in God because Hezekiah faced an absolutely impossible circumstance. And we face those in life all the time where we may think that there's no way out. And as I began to look, I saw that these 8 strategies of Rabshakeh can be very powerful. They can be very intimidating. They can be very luring that, yeah, let's just go along with this voice and this spirit and let's do these things. But I think it really strengthened my faith in God because I saw that God is the victor, God is the warrior, God always comes through. And he sets forth principles in his word that if we follow him, he promises he's the faithful one. He promises that they'll come to pass. So I think it really strengthened my faith in God and faith in his word.
Talk about some of these 8 strategies. You can't give your book away on a podcast, but talk about some of them that really stood out that you think are, oh man, this is something that's just as clear as day that is even happening now.
Yeah, I think the first one, which is the foundation, is who do you trust? And that's what the Spirit was really saying. Trust me. Don't trust Hezekiah. Don't trust Yahweh. Don't trust God. Trust me. I can give you much more than what Yahweh can or what Hezekiah can. So the foundation strategy really is who do you trust? Do you trust God? And Hezekiah obviously did. Or do you trust the culture around you? And then I build on that. We have, is the Bible mere words? The Bible says that men shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. But we have to determine what we think about the words that are in the Bible. And that was the second one, is that the Spirit of Rabshakeh was saying, look, this is just mere words. I wouldn't be worried about it. And then he gets into deliverance. He says 5 times, Hezekiah can't deliver you. But I talk about that there's deliverance in only one, and that's God. And then he mocks, he reviles God, and I get into detail with that. And then he really says, look, I can provide you anything that you need. God is God enough, or do we just need to, have the little picketed fence and the home and the garden, and we should be fine? And I talk a little bit about that. Then I do a whole section on high places. Unfortunately, Israel and Judah, kind of use the high places to worship other gods. But I ask, what is your high place? Which is similar to who do you trust in? And then the seventh one, I talked about how fear is the fuel of Rabshakeh. And then the eighth one is, it's an interesting one that I think about a lot, is after everything else, he said, God told me to do this. So really we have to have discernment, just like you said. Is this really the voice of the Lord, or is this just the voice of a man speaking that's trying to say that God's the one that set him up? So these were the 8 strategies that were used against Hezekiah. They're good strategies. They're still used today. The Bible says not to be ignorant of Satan's devices. So he uses these same devices today, some stronger than others. And then we have to decide who we're going to trust, who we're going to put our faith in.
Listening to you, I thought about this. So, you're a king. You're the leader of a nation. You want to take over another nation. Obviously, the most profitable way to do that would be through some sort of sell job, some sort of merger, really hostile takeover, some sort of diplomacy to reduce bloodshed and loss, because bloodshed and loss is going to cost you, a lot more down the road. You're going to have more rebellion. You're going to have resistance. You're going to have bitterness. You're going to have so any man or woman with half a brain knows that if psychological warfare is probably something that you want to try. Forgetting the whole fact that conquering another nation, that whole foundation of motive has to be examined in and of itself. But sooner or later, just to awaken the consciousness is, maybe it's a cultural debate what's going on, but in the digression of things, it will eventually get to force. And that's, of course, where it was going to, until the biblical account of the miraculous um, uh, uh, interceding of God against the Assyrians. That somewhat humorous to me. I know it's not humorous, but somewhat humorous to me in that story, for those who are unfamiliar, is so there's a big number that's thrown out, 185,000. I don't know if you did study on that, whether that you think is a legitimate number or hyperbole or whatever, but 185,000 soldiers, camped outside of the walls of Jerusalem. And then in one evening, the armies of God wipe out not 185,000, but a lot of them, to where the biblical story has, in my mind, Tim, this is what it looks like. I'm in my tent, slept on a rock wrong. I get up, trying to stretch my neck. I'm stretching out, and I notice that there's dead bodies everywhere. For whatever reason, I was spared, but the obvious sign of defeat. I mean, can you imagine the fear that must have gone through the other soldiers? And of course, Sennacherib and company split. Went back, and of course, the story gets worse for him. When he gets murdered by his own. But it made me think about the other side of the story that you're talking about. I don't know how long it took for the Assyrians to march through, to come from the north, march through Israel, make its way down Jerusalem. But it wasn't days, it wasn't weeks, probably wasn't months. It might have been a year or 2 or 3. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think in the 4th year of Hezekiah's reign was when they took over Assyria. And then after that, they turned their focus to Judah. But yeah, I think that the Bible sometimes doesn't tell us as far as the exact timing. That's
right. But there's enough information to know that Hezekiah had some time to see that it was coming.
Right.
And if I remember right, there was messages made that, kind of making fun of Hezekiah, that he was like a bird caught in his own cage, right, there in Jerusalem, in the city of Jerusalem. But so he knew it was coming, and the people knew it was coming. And so he used all of his God-given creativity, and strategies to fortify the walls. I think there's some writings, I don't know if they're biblical or not, maybe extra biblical, that he even was trying to acquire mercenaries to join the team. He had the underground water streams, made sure that the Assyrians couldn't get to that, rerouted that into the city of Jerusalem as examples. So he did everything he could, which kind of reminds me of the story of the fish and loaves, right? Is he gave what he could give, but it wasn't enough. And then if I were to do it chronologically in my mind of what makes him a hero to me is, so he's leading. He's because he's obviously had to direct the people of Jerusalem to do these things, the water, the wall. I would imagine that they were shoring up their ability to defend themselves. Those kinds of things were going on. That seems to be pretty clear. And then there's part of the text where he recognizes that this is a grave situation. And what I really love about this is he tears his clothes, which was a public sign. I don't think he did it in the square, but he did it in the witness of someone, maybe his internal court or cohort or whatever. And of course, that would spread out. What I like about him tearing his clothes is he called it like it was. And I think a lot of leaders still struggle with that. They struggle with just telling the truth. He tore his clothes as a way of mourning, distraught, humility, and then he prayed. And so the third thing he did is he prayed. First thing he did is he did everything he could. Second thing he did is he acknowledged his position in all of this, which wasn't enough, by tearing his clothes. Third, he prayed. Fourth, he sent messengers to Isaiah, I believe it is, as if Isaiah didn't know, I assume, but basically asking for guidance, asking, and maybe Hezekiah was at a place where he felt he wasn't hearing from God. God was deaf. We go through times like that in our life. And so whatever that story was, the point is he went to Isaiah and then got the message back from Isaiah that he's not going to have to worry about this one. God was going to, handle this one. And then the story goes on. Have you been able to figure out where in the life of Hezekiah, in relationship to him being told that he had X years to live, he was going to die? Are we being presumptuous to think that when he asked for more time and God gave him more time, was it 15 years as I recall?
Yeah.
Top of my head. Is it presumptuous to say that this was about the time maybe that was going on, or was this a completely different time, do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. I looked at that, but my thinking is I think that it happened shortly thereafter when Babylon was invited. And
oh, he screwed up with Babylon. Then he made a mistake later. Yeah.
And I mean, his son, I think about this a lot. He had a son, Manasseh, that wasn't the greatest either. So gives us some hope with our children, I think. But I think how I've worked it is I think that it happened shortly after this occurred.
Yeah. And the mistake he made there as a leader, and that's the other thing that we can talk about here with leadership, is even in the book that I just recently released, Story, I think there's 2 chapters in the book where I talk about a span of leadership in my life where I did some things really well, and I talked about those, and then I did some things that weren't so great, and I talked about those, and maybe even looking back at it, why I think they weren't so great, and what led to them. And this story isn't about me, but I do wonder. The book of Proverbs talks a little bit. It doesn't refer to Hezekiah's mistake, but it does illustrate Hezekiah's mistake. Where, and I'm not going to be able to give us a chapter and verse, but I know you recall these. It kind of sometimes talks about the foolishness of flaunting what we have.
Right.
And it also talks about, many wealthy act like they're poor when in fact they got a ton of money. It kind of gives that contrast where,
Right.
in this case, Hezekiah kind of holds up his wealth in front of the Babylonians. That wasn't smart.
No, no. And it kind of teaches us that we could have the greatest victory in the world, and then, a year or two later, be really challenged on something. And Hezekiah didn't make a real wise decision when it came to that.
Yeah, spiritually and psychologically, I've always been taught and have experienced that it seems like we're most exposed to mistakes when, right after a great victory in our lives. It's kind of like you would think it would be during the low points in our lives, and certainly there's temptation for that, right? There's temptation of survival, of lying, cheating, stealing, in whatever form that looks like for survival purposes. So you can say that would be some of the temptations there. Revenge, even maybe, would be another example at a low point. But also at the times where we have achieved an amazing victory, what happens there? We get filled with pride, maybe, take our eye off the ball. I'm not sure how you would say it.
I think we get prideful, and for whatever reason, I think we just need to be on guard all the time, because I think that is a real temptation to sit back on our laurels and think that we've really accomplished something. And then that's when we really get attacked, and we have to determine, at that point in time that, pride may not be the best way to handle it.
There was a time in my life, Tim, that what kind of law do you practice, by the way?
I did general initially because I started my own law firm out of law school, but I do personal injury primarily.
Personal injury, okay. So you'll probably find this to be humorous. I think up to the age of about 45 years old, I had been hearing, going to leadership conferences, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I've been hearing about how so many leaders go through, when someone stabs you in the back, what do we call that? Help me, Timothy.
I'm trying to think, but I'm kind of drawing a blank too.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. The listeners going, it's this. They're yelling at us right now.
Probably so.
But betrayal. That's what I was thinking of. Betrayal. I've heard all these stories about inner circle betrayals, and and then looking back at it and why, and all these stories. And I remember thinking to myself, man, I'm glad that's never happened to me. And I'm never going to think, well, I must be better than the rest of those leaders, because, I'm just not going to think that. I'm not going to think that. I'm going to be humble, and I'm just going to be grateful that hasn't happened to me. But I do think when you hear a lot of those stories for a long time, you can't but help begin to think, well, maybe I am a little bit better than all those guys out. And then, of course, it happened to me. And then you go through that. So it's just so important with this book that you have written, and the things that we read about and things that we study, and not to make people weird or to think there's a devil behind every bush. There should be a defensive side to leadership, should there not, where we're on guard?
Because I think we naturally want to be our own hero. We want to be the hero of our own story. And I tried to say that self-sufficiency is not always the best route, because then we leave God out. We think we're our own gods, and that's where we run into problems. When we start thinking we're better, I'm thinking about Jesus. I mean, Judas, he prayed all night and picked Judas, and Judas wasn't faithful to him. I think about how the disciples were arguing who would be the greatest among. And Jesus was saying, well, if you really want to be a leader, if you really want to be someone, be a servant to all people. So it was common to Jesus, and it's common to anybody that, steps out into a role of leadership, is you're going to have to deal sometimes with people that may not have your best interests in mind. And again, I don't think pride is the way to handle it. I don't think beating our chest is the way to handle it. I think that we need to go to a greater power, God, and ask for wisdom on how to handle the situation.
As an attorney, you have to be a logical thinker. You have to be a process-oriented thinker. You mentioned the Jesus-Judas thing. What do you make of that?
It's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, he probably knew. I mean, I would think he knew pretty quickly that Judas's heart wasn't in the right place. In fact, there's a verse in John that said that he was in charge of the money and he was stealing out of it. And then to betray Jesus too, it's just, sometimes I can't wrap my mind around it, to think that somebody that was in the inner circle of Jesus would betray him like that. So it's hard sometimes to wrap the mind around it, but it does happen. And I think it's something that we need to be on guard about.
I think your book has a lot to do with leadership. When I walk through leadership philosophy, this is kind of what I think about. I think it was the Stoics that said that the more one knows themselves, the more they know God. The more a person knows God, the more they'll know themselves. Meaning that if you want to understand yourself, what better source than the one who created you? What better source? And then, of course, that creator is the engineer, the author. And God obviously wants us to understand our purpose and our why. And so to me, leadership does start with kind of a curiosity of, why am I here? How did I get here? Who's responsible for that? And what am I to do with that? I remember Dr. Dan Spader was somebody that I met when I was in my mid-20s. It's probably one of the things I can be most grateful for, is the kind of people that God, or for those of you who are still trying to consider whether there's God or not, you can throw the word fate in there. I'm fine with that. That God or fate has put into my life just people who have sometimes just shared with me a nugget even that just has stayed with me. And I remember Dr. Spader said to me when I was thinking about my approach to ministry, he said, there's really only three things to talk about. There is who is God, what has he done for us, and then what should our response be? And I really appreciate things like that. I'm not limited to those three, but it seems like every good question comes from those, three. So to me, leadership starts there with that sense of self-awareness and then leading self. I remember one time I gave a talk in a Christian environment where I talked about the importance of leading oneself. And I had a young man whose heart was in the right place come up to me afterwards and said, I really struggled with your message because I thought we were to be led by the Spirit of God. And I said, well, gosh, what did I say that would cause you to believe that that's who makes a decision that they're going to follow the ways of God? And that's where he gives us this incredible will, of ours. So the point is if I'm not self-aware and if I'm not leading myself well, what makes me think I can lead others in the right manner? So it is a humble process. It's really is a serving process. It's a curiosity process. And to your point about Jesus and Judas, sometimes we just have to scratch our head and continue to walk in curiosity, walk in faith.
Yeah. And I think what you said is it's really a partnership. I mean, if God numbers the hairs of our head, he's concerned about every detail of our life, which includes how we lead others, what position and purpose that he set for our lives. So, and I think I talk about in my book the importance of working together with God as a partner, and how he's so concerned about every detail of our lives. So I definitely agree with you that there's a partnership involved there. And I think if we really want to accomplish what we want to accomplish as leaders, I think that we can go far beyond what we even think we can go on, like Hezekiah did, by letting God be our partner.
If you're looking for a book to read, if you're one of the few and you're like us and you like to read, I want you to get this. I want you to get this book. Like I said, I'm going to order it because I've read enough of it on the excerpt that Timothy has provided for us on Amazon. Is there any other? Is that the place for us to get the book? And give us the name again one more time.
It's The Spirit of Rabshakeh is Alive and Well in America. You can get it on Amazon. I also have a website called faithofhezekiah.com. You can order it through that also. And I think it'll bless you because I tried to write it in everyday language. I'm the only attorney in my family. I don't come from a long list of silver spoons. I've done everything from making pizzas to pumping gas to cleaning toilets. So I've done it all. And I think it's just a real simple approach to what God set forth in his word.
Well, there's a right way and there's a wrong way to make pizza. So I respect those who have taken up that craft. I'm kind of a pizza Nazi. I have a certain way that
Yeah.
I like mine done. Yeah, like you, I've done different things in my life too, and I appreciate Timothy. I appreciate it's good meeting you. Thank you for writing the book. Yeah, I think it's a good book that helps people think, and we certainly need that today in all of our lives.
And I appreciate you having me on the show, and I appreciate your show. And I think people will be blessed with the book. So I encourage them to get it and let me know what you think.
Thank you for joining us here at the Today Count Show. Be sure to like and subscribe on whatever platform you listen or watch so you don't miss any content. And stay tuned for more coming soon.